Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this oration. We've named this oration. This is a one time oration after Dr. Sudesh Kamat. Sudesh Kamat was our embryologist. He's the one who injected the first ICSI baby of this country. And we are really proud of him. And we lost him, unfortunately, very suddenly to a heart attack. And really, this is with a lot of love and affection in his memory that we have installed this oration this time, and there will be a permanent oration in his name in the Yuva embryology. This time, just as a mark of respect, because everybody is here at the annual conference, we have an oration on his name. So thank you, Orissa chapter, for doing this for Sudesh. And will you introduce, Jay?
Good morning. Welcome to ISER 2024. And here from our chairpersons, I welcome the orator, Dr. Jaydeep Tank. The President Fakti, please give me 2 minutes to introduce you, even though you are already introduced to everybody. Dr. Jaydeep Tank is the President Fakshi this year 2024, and he is the chair of YGAA Committee of AOFOG and project lead of Foxy and USAID project in 2024. And Secretary General, he managed as Secretary General of Foxy for 3 years from 2021 and 22, awarded Foxy FRCOG honoris causa by Royal College of Obstetrician and Gynecologist, is the past president of Mumbai Obstetrics and Gynecology Society. Dr. Jaydeep Tank is a man of unique coordination of brain, heart, and hand. And he envisaged things in such a nice way, and you can hear him in a very elaborate way. Dr. Jaydeep, you have a long list. Immediate past Deputy Chair, Secretary, SCA Australia, Federation of Obstetrics Gynecology, AOFOG. Immediate past Chair of International Federation of Obstetrics and Gynecology, FIGO. And past Chair of Publication and Newsletter of AOFOG, past Chair of Reproductive Endocrinology of AOFOG, and past Chair of MTP Committee of Foxy, where you did an excellent work, and I remember those days. And he's a consultant in Ashwini Maternity and Surgical Hospital and Center of Endoscopy and IVF, visiting consultant of IVF, more than a dozen of IVF center, independent director of board of API Holding Pharmacies, India's biggest pharmacy. And I think we must all remember Dr. Jaydeep, as he was instrumental in drafting the proposal for FIGO, which resulted in a grant of $30 million for a 10-country project, 8 in Africa and 2 in South America. Bravo! And was the technical lead for this project. Thank you, Jaydeep, for bringing honor to us. He is also instrumental in obtaining the project lead for the largest ever grant awarded to Foxy for over 2 million US dollar, amounting to INR 16.6 crore. Wonderful. From Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And he has a lot of contribution in different fields, lot of papers published. And here, ladies and gentlemen, I present before you Dr. Jaydeep Tank.
Jaydeep, can I just say one word? For Isar, he's really been a help. We had the ART law coming, and I think Jaydeep was a part of that cell. Through Foxy, Isar, we did a lot of talks with the government, and we've had a lot of changes in the law. So Jaydeep has been instrumental in that, and being the Foxy president, as a Isar president, I was happy that you agreed, you honored us that you will deliver this oration. So welcome. And I'm happy to have Dr. Jayashree Patnaik as my co-chair, whom I've been working with for a long time. And she's an amazing silent woman, but a fantastic clinician. So, yeah. So we will, now the dais is all yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Hara, for those very kind, very warm, and very generous words. I must thank the entire ISAR committee, the organizing committee led by Dr. Sujata, Dr. Mahanti, Dr. Rajat, and of course, Dr. PC Mahapatra, sir. Thank you for remembering that slide, sir. It's always a pleasure and privilege to be in Bhubaneswar. And I must say that this time, besides being a pleasure and privilege, it is simple, undiluted joy that I'm here when Nandita is the president of ISAR and Amit is the president elect. I understand that both of you are going to hold these posts only for a few more hours, so you should enjoy them while you can. And I've been Nandita's secretary when I was the MOGS secretary, and I was her secretary also when she was the Foxy president. And it's such a joy working with her. She's such an enabler. She says do something, and then she has full faith in you to execute that. So it's really wonderful working with a president like that. And I worked with Amit when he was the president of MOGS, and I was the treasurer of Mumbai Society, and we had a couple of exciting experiences at that time. I must also acknowledge past president of Foxy, Dr. Shanta Kumari, who had given us such a brilliant AICOG very recently, and all the other past presidents of ISAR who are here, including Dr. Manish Banker. Of course, ISAR is a very vibrant organization. It's got this absolutely wonderful executive committee, and it goes from strength to strength on what the past presidents of ISAR have given and contributed over the years. People always get surprised when I tell them that this is only the fourth ISAR I'm attending. In fact, the first ISAR I attended was the one organized in Uti, I think by Dr. Asha Rao, and Dr. Meru Hansotia was the president at that time. And since then, I have attended another couple of ISARs. This is only the fourth one I'm attending. And it's a unique pleasure and a privilege because Nandita just said, and I did not know this, that this is going to be the one and only Sudesh Kamat Oration in the annual ISAR. It gives me really great pleasure, tinged with a lot of memories and some sadness also about the fact that we lost Sudesh so early. Thank you again to the chairpersons Hara, Nandita, and Madam for chairing this session for me. A lot has been said about Sudesh. I began when I started IVF in 1999. Sudesh was the person who used to come and do our ICSIs. He was, as Nandita already said, a pioneer. He had extraordinary skills. He was very hardworking, ever smiling, and unflappable. Sudesh used to be so busy that it always used to be a bit of a tension कि Sudesh कितने बजे आएगा. But he always used to come. He used to inject the oocytes, and then he used to always tell me, "नहीं, don't worry, कुछ फर्क नहीं पड़ता है. Everything will be all right." And really, everything was all right. At that time, I was just starting off, and Sudesh already had so many years of experience, and it was really very helpful to me that his calm demeanor sort of made me go through that initial phase very smoothly. In fact, he worked with us for our first 3 or 4 centers, and then, of course, we got busy and he got super busy, and we still remain friends right till the end. If you look at this, this is a post from Facebook which Sudesh had put up in 2010. 14 cases, 3 TISA, 120 oocytes injected in 2 hours 45 minutes. I think that's really quite a remarkable achievement, and even if he's not there anymore, I think he deserves a very big round of applause. And I know that wherever he is, he's looking down upon us, he's blessing ISAR, and he's giving all the best wishes. And I would also like to convey on behalf of ISAR my deepest respect, regards, and love to Minoti, his daughter Tanya, and his son Karan. My family has had a long history with ISAR. If you go to the ISAR website and you take out the ISAR constitution, you will see this. ISAR was formed 16th February 1991, and you will see highlighted over there that the memorandum of association of the society was actually seconded by my father. My father and my sister Nivedita were the founding members of ISAR, and my sister was actually the first ever honorary clinical secretary of ISAR for 7 years, and then was the honorary joint treasurer of ISAR for many, many years before she decided not to continue with associations anymore and started working full time into embryology. So we have a long history with ISAR. My father was also the second vice president of ISAR, and that's why it's a very unique privilege. And I understand that this privilege comes to me because I'm the president of Foxy. And I must here thank Foxy and all of you, because I think there are so many overlaps between Foxy and ISAR. All of you who are members of ISAR are probably also members of Foxy. And if you're not, please become members of Foxy. And it is because of all of you that I am the president of Foxy. Assisted reproduction has always stood at the intersection of medicine, law, and ethics. You would think that this absolutely amazing breakthrough in science and technology would be universally greeted by a lot of acclaim. But when Louisa Brown was born, and here she is, the lovely Louise, there was also a lot of trepidation. I recently read this article about media reactions to the birth of the first IVF baby, which is a publication in a sociology journal. And although uniformly the reactions were positive, there were also several negative reactions to IVF. People said that we are playing God. People had doubts about what about the embryos which died? Does that constitute life, and are we abandoning life? And for example, this genetist Robert J. Berry said Western society is built around the family. Once you divorce sex from procreation, what happens to this family? So it's not as if IVF was received with very great acclaim by everybody. And I think this is the root of why IVF has always been looked upon as something which needs to be regulated. If you look at the history of IVF in India, you'll find that once IVF achieved a tipping point in terms of volume, people immediately started talking about regulation. They did not bother to ask whether this regulation was necessary. And you know that all of us as gynecologists look upon regulation with a lot of cynicism and skepticism. We have experience with so many acts and so many laws. I don't know how many of you are Harry Potter fans, but I love that book series. And this is probably the way we look at laws, regulations, and the judiciary in our profession. We don't look upon it as something which facilitates our providing services. We look upon it as something of a stumbling block in our effort to provide services. So when Scrimagar asked Hermione, are you planning to follow a career in magical law? She says, no, I'm not. I'm actually hoping to do some good in the world. And quite honestly, I agreed with this till probably karma paid me back, and now my son has become a lawyer. But because of this cynicism and skepticism which surrounds our attitude towards regulation, laws, policies, government guidelines become something like what Mark Twain said about a classic, something that everybody wants to have read and nobody wants to read. I'm not asking for a show of hands, but just think to yourself, have you read the entire ART Act and the Surrogacy Act and the rules, the regulations, and all the multiple GRs that have come out after the Act has been introduced? I would dare say that the large majority will say that they have not. But you need to, because acts like these, the MTP Act, the PCPNDT Act, now the ART and the Surrogacy Act, essentially govern the way we deliver service to our patients. So I'm going to tell you the story of the ART Act. I'm going to tell you how it evolved, why the Act was thought to be necessary. Then I'm going to address a few controversies around the Act. And then lastly, I'm going to tell you about a survey that we did along with the University College of London about the voices of healthcare providers and what healthcare providers feel about the Act. And then I'm going to end by talking about some of the next steps that we need to take to make this Act much easier to follow. So, as Julie Andrews sang in The Sound of Music, let's start at the very beginning, a very good place to start. the story of the ART Act is actually quite old. The first meeting I attended for issues around the ART Act was way back in 2010 when the ICMR proposed guidelines. At that time, it was not supposed to be an act. ICMR was just supposed to come out with some guidelines. And we had multiple meetings. I remember there was one meeting. Nandita, you'll remember you were there. I think we were sitting next to each other in the Mayfair room in Bombay many, many years back. So it's an old act. Foxy and ISAR have been active in advocating to make the act simple, make it easy to follow, and try to minimize penalties. So this is when Dr. Prakash Trivedi was the president and Dr. Rishikesh Pai was the Secretary General of Foxy. We had drafted this letter and sent it to the ministry. We had an opportunity actually to go to the Standing Committee on Public Health in the Rajya Sabha. You can see that's me, Amit, and Sarita over there. And Nandita and Rishma were also there for this meeting. And we had made a representation to the Standing Committee on Public Health. And let me share what we had told the Standing Committee. First, there seemed to be this whole thing that we make a lot of money in IVF, or that surrogacy industry is a very, very big multi-billion dollar kind of an industry in India. And look at all the newspaper reports which seem to very strongly suggest that surrogacy is a very, very big money spinning industry. So what we did was we looked at this Ernst and Young report from July 2015 because we had gone in 2017 for this meeting at the Rajya Sabha. And we had looked at the estimated number of cycles, which this is not our or ISAR's data. This is Ernst and Young bringing data by extrapolating statistics. And what they said was that there are approximately 1 lakh IVF cycles in 2015. Now, we presented this to the Rajya Sabha that surrogacy cycles we know constitute approximately 1% of the total number of cycles. So if this is the case, India sees around 1,000 surrogacy cycles a year. And if that is the case, and assuming these pregnancy rates and take-home baby rates, this will result in 320 babies. 320 babies only. Remember, India sees 45 million pregnancies a year. And what surrogacy produces are 320 babies at that time in 2015. And what we tried to tell them was that there are two sides to every story. Unfortunately, our side of the story has perhaps not been presented as well as it should have. What is being presented are only the cons, that it's exploitative, it's unregulated, there's a lack of legal protection for donors and surrogates, and of course, India runs the reputational risk in a way of being seen as a center for third-party reproduction. But there is not enough to address the pros. The fact that this is an exercise of reproductive choice, it promotes a woman's right to privacy and procreation, it advocates economic autonomy, and most importantly, it's an effective treatment for infertility. So our view at that time was that there should be a single window or online registration. There should be a due process for any kind of punishment or any kind of offense registration. It should be decriminalized. Doctors should not be treated as criminals, and there should be compensation toward expenses for medically indicated surrogacy as well as donors. So we requested at that time to the Standing Committee on Public Health that we do want regulation. We support having regulation, but that regulation should be well-meaning and balanced. There should be adequate data collection followed by a situational analysis, because we felt that the narrative was skewed opposite or away from the medical profession at that time. We asked for a broad stakeholder meeting, a final consensus and draft, and then the passage of the bills. In fact, this is when we went to the public, to the Standing Committee 2016. And if you see this report, which was presented finally to the Parliament, you'll see that a lot of what we had suggested was actually there in this 2016 report. But then another committee was asked to give a report, and by the time that report came out in 2019, all of our suggestions, or most of our suggestions, had actually been shunted out. And we were not actually called at that time to represent to the Standing Committee, and this report came out, and it's on the basis of this 2019 report that the ART Act finally got passed. So it took 16 years, 8 drafts, 3 parliamentary committees, and it finally concluded with the Indian Parliament passing both the ART Act and the Surrogacy Regulation Act, which was then followed by the promulgation of the rules for both these acts, and that happened in 21 and then in 22. Let me deal with the Surrogacy Regulation Act, and actually, I need only one slide to do that. And the reason I need only one slide is because of this chapter 2, 3, subsection 2, which says that essentially you cannot pay a surrogate. Any surrogacy that is done has to be altruistic in nature, and no surrogate can be paid in any way, shape, or form, in like or in kind, for undergoing that surrogacy. Now, you can understand that this could have one of two consequences. One, which we are feeling now, is that surrogacy essentially stops. How can you expect a surrogate to do this on an altruistic basis? It either stops or it goes down to the bare minimum, or even worse than what existed before, it goes underground. For some reason, people start either paying surrogates in cash or in kind, say that this is being done for altruistic reason, and this we had told that, similar to the Organ Transplantation Act, where so many problems occur and new cousins, new close friends, new childhood friends suddenly spring up when a kidney is needed. At the same time, this will happen with surrogacy. Of course, this is as it stands now, and I'll tell you what's going to happen to it later. So, this in a sense is what the ART Act is all about. And these are the questions which the ART Act seeks to answer. What is it about? Who needs to register? And so on and so forth. Now, I'm not going into the absolute details of each point because there is a panel discussion at 2:30, which I found when I was contextualizing this presentation to the rest of the program. So if you want more details, perhaps you can attend this panel. But what I'll do is focus on some questions which I keep on getting asked about the ART Act, and those are the questions in bold over there. So what is the ART Act about? It's essentially to regulate and supervise ART clinics and ART banks and prevent misuse. Therefore, if you read the Act, and again, let me urge you very strongly to read the Act, you'll realize that the tone and the tenor of this Act is very different from, say, the MTP Act. Nazar is here. We have worked very closely together on the MTP Act. And you will find that the MTP Act, at its essence, is something which creates an exception to the Indian Penal Code and allows us and empowers us to provide abortion and also empowers women to undergo the abortion. The ART Act, on the other hand, has got a very strict, very school master or principal kind of a tone and tenor telling us, you naughty children, sit down, and this is what you need to do. There is some confusion about the various authorities, but it's actually quite simple. There's a national board and a state board which makes recommendations, gives guidelines, etc. But the people who will be in touch with us on a day-to-day basis or implement are the appropriate authorities in the states and union territories. And parallelly, there is a registry, and it's the job of the registry to collate all the data. And the purpose of having the registry is not only to collate data, but it's to make recommendations to the boards on the basis of the data that is collated. Now, this is a very important question. When the Act actually came out, this is the question I used to get asked the most often. Who needs to register? Technically, if you're not handling gametes, either sperms or eggs, you don't need to register, but that's technically. There are a lot of advisories going around which says that even if you're not handling sperms or you're not handling oocytes and you're only doing follicular monitoring, it's still a good idea to register. I think this is still quite controversial. For me, what I understand from the Act is that if you're not doing an IUI in your clinic, or if you're not doing a pickup, or you're not handling gametes in any way, and you're only doing ultrasound for follicular monitoring, you don't need to register. But again, as I said, it is still a matter of controversy. But what has been perhaps the most controversial part of the Act is how it has impacted third-party reproduction. And it has impacted third-party reproduction because of this clause which says that you could donate oocyte or sperm only once. in your entire lifetime. And moreover, when you stimulate a patient, you are supposed to do this wonderful and very magical stimulation so that you are able to retrieve only 7 mature eggs, and then you can use that. And then, very magnanimously, the act goes on to say that from these 7 mature eggs, you can freeze and use it next time. When I was in the meeting and when inputs were asked on a personal basis, I wrote to the ministry saying that I've been doing IVF now since 1999 and I still don't know this magical protocol by which I can produce only 7 M2 eggs and make sure that those 7 M2 eggs can then be used. And you know the reply I got? The reply I got was, if you are very careful, you can do it. Well, that was rather unfortunate. And then, of course, this whole new entity of ART banks has been created. And then finally, the offenses and penalties. And remember, these offenses and penalties don't only cover you as the healthcare provider, it also covers the executive head and officers of the clinics or banks. So everybody comes under the act. What is really problematic is this clause 34 here, which says, whoever contravenes any of the provisions of the Act and any rules made thereunder for which no penalty has been provided shall be punishable as per subsection 2. Now, this is very broad. It's actually copy pasted from the PCPNDT Act, and we definitely need to get some more clarity on it. However, despite the fact that there are rules and there is the Act, it still remained very, very unclear as to what exactly we should do. So, post hoc ergo propter hoc, after this, therefore, because of this, because of the way the Act was framed and drafted, the government has issued several gazettes and clarifications. Now, this indicates two things. One, perhaps the Act was not thought through as well as it should have. But secondly, and in a more positive frame of mind, it indicates that the government is responsive and sensitive to the feedback that has been received. In fact, if you look at all the notifications, amendments, and GRs that have been issued after the fact, and let me tell you, I've been working on policy matters for women's health since many years, and I've never seen so many clarifications being issued by the government. There have been a total of 91 notifications which have been issued under the ART Act, which is all for the good. The health ministers had several meetings, and of course, let's remember that we are not the only country in the world to have an ART Act which sometimes does not resonate with us or sometimes is not as good as we think it should be. For example, in Canada, paid egg and sperm donation is actually a more serious crime than inciting genocide, if you can believe it. The penalty for paying someone to donate is a fine of up to $500,000 or 10 years in jail, and the penalty for advocating genocide is a maximum of 5 years in prison. I mean, that's a real problem there. Brazilian surrogacy also requires the gestational carrier to be related to the family. And if you look at Europe, and this is a nice article, it's open access, you can go ahead and access it. Switzerland, Norway, and Germany do not allow egg donation at all. And even in the countries where egg donation is allowed, there are several restrictions. Of course, once the Act came in, we wanted to know what the impact of the Act was on our routine practice. And we looked at the literature. There's, of course, this NARI data from ISAR in 2019. If you look on top there, that's a publication I co-authored for AOFOG, which talked about the updated status of ART. And then there was, of course, the ICMAT report, I think, which Manish Bhai was a part of. So we did this survey, and we did this along with the University College of London. There's a Professor Prabha Koteswaram there, who is the professor of social justice. And if you scan that QR code over there with your camera phone, you'll be able to download this article. It's available open access. We've actually made it open access in the Indian Journal. So when you scan that QR code, it will take you to the page of the journal. And on top, you'll see the title. You have to tap on that. If you tap on that, it will take you directly to the article. You don't need to log in and so on and so forth. So basically, this was called Voices from Healthcare Providers to assess the impact of the Indian ART Act. So we carried out this survey in October 22. It consisted of 30 questions, was self-administered. There were 1,113 respondents, 478 completed, and that's why all our analysis is based on those 478 responses. We had a very interesting spread across age. Our oldest respondent was actually 91 years old. And I didn't know who it was, but there was a fairly even distribution across ages. Although the Western states had the maximum participation, there was participation from 24 states. So you could fairly say that this was representative of the national picture. And of course, the overwhelming majority of respondents were practicing IVF, which lent validity to the survey. It was very encouraging to know that over half the respondents had actually read the act, and the next largest source of information was webinars, CMEs, and lectures. So, for all of those who keep on questioning why we have so many conferences and webinars, perhaps that's a good response to that. And this resulted in a very large number of us feeling that we know a great deal, a lot, or had a moderate amount of information about the act. And for me, this speaks to the importance of dissemination of authentic. But this, for me, was one of the most important findings of our survey. And it was that 83% of us, healthcare providers, felt that the acts were actually required. And this is important because there seems to be some kind of a feeling amongst non-providers, activists, policymakers, etc., that doctors are not amenable to registration. I think this very squarely contradicts that. And of course, within this, we found an interesting thing that the younger generation was more amenable to regulation compared to the older generation. Perhaps it speaks of the way they have been trained. Almost 45% of the respondents had registered only as an ART clinic. Only one clinic had registered as a surrogacy clinic, and this will be reflected in the data that I'll show you later. And less than 1% of the respondents registered as an ART bank. Interestingly, 12%, and this is something which was worrisome, 12% of the survey respondents claimed that they would stop doing the procedures which required them to register under the Act. And this is important because it speaks to the fact that access to these ART treatments might go down. The majority of respondents agreed that whatever qualifications, minimum equipment, forms of consent, etc., were asked for were quite reasonable. However, they had strong disagreement with the sale and transfer of gametes, and a majority of the respondents viewed the minimum mandatory sentences as unreasonable. They said that there should be graded punishment and mistakes in paperwork should not be treated to the same extent as actual offenses which cause significant harm to the patient. The most important impact of the ART Act seems to be on the donor program. On the rule of egg donation once in a lifetime and sperm donation restricted to only one commissioning couple, obviously, the overwhelming majority of respondents thought it was very unreasonable. Almost all thought in one way or another that donor programs will become inaccessible and unaffordable. And honestly speaking, I'm seeing it in my practice. The cost of third-party reproduction in my clinic has increased almost by 75 to 80% compared to what it was earlier. There was also a major concern about availability of donors or women who are willing to undergo egg donation, and this would ultimately lead to a paucity of donors. Of course, in terms of progress, a lot of people had registered, and this is something which we again perhaps don't give ourselves enough credit for. A lot of us actually waited for some time, tried to get clarity, and then registered because there was a time lag between the need for registration and promulgation of an act. In the comment section, there were comments ranging from the pithy, like this one. It increases the stress of the IVF clinicians effectively, and PC sir just told us how to de-stress, and it sort of ranged, but again, the predominant concern was the availability of oocyte donors. Now, if you look at the data, and this was accessed in November when I had to make a presentation at the WHO meeting, if you look at this, the total applications received were 5,004, but only 361 clinics were registered. Compared to the number of clinics, the number of banks who had applied were very low, and the number of surrogacy clinics were even lower. If you look at a detailed breakdown of the registrations state-wise, you will see that there were 13 states and union territories where some form of registration had taken place. So if you look at this, and this is a bit of an anomaly here, in Maharashtra, Surrogacy clinics were registered much before ART clinics. In fact, the process of registering of ART clinics has just begun. My clinic in Mumbai just underwent an inspection 2 days back. It obviously points to the fact that there are gaps in implementation. We hope that these gaps will be filled very soon. Further steps, there are petitions going on in the Supreme Court, and this petition in the Supreme Court has challenged various sections of the ART Act, including the inability to pay donors and surrogates as being an infringement of their constitutional rights. We had a meeting with WHO, India, and ICMR. Nandita, Reshma, Rishikesh, and Madam here, who is from the steering committee, were a part of it. And we actually looked at various parts of the ART Act to make recommendations. I'm very happy to say that as per the recommendations from the expert, the WHO India office has initiated a memo for inclusion of infertility in Ayushman Bharat and other private insurances, and is currently following up this memo with the Ministry of Health. Let's see what happens. Finally, in the last 5 minutes of my presentation, let me say that a lot of what the Act looks like now and what the perceptions of providers who do IVF comes from narratives. It also comes from the fact that perhaps we don't see infertility as a public health problem. We look at maternal mortality, we look at contraception, we look at abortion, we look at PIH, preeclampsia, all as public health problems. But we somehow seem to think, or at least the activists and policymakers seem to think, that infertility is a bit of an elitist kind of a problem. But it's not. If you look at this very nice statement from the European body, you'll see that it encourages all policymakers to look at infertility as a public health problem. In fact, I have a firm and long standing belief that the narratives which stigmatize the medical procedures, legitimate medical procedures, do a very great disservice, not only to us as healthcare providers of women, because they stigmatize us, but also to the community at large. In fact, I had tweeted this many years back, where I said rhetoric has replaced, sometimes even dangerously, what is best for the woman, her baby, and the family, and a rational, evidence-based approach to this issue is vital, rather than the lazy narrative of the commercialization of medicine in general and birthing in particular. So I don't know, I mean, we've studied this in school, and we know that there were 3 laws of Newton, but there is a new law of Newton which has recently been discovered. I call it the 4th law, which says, for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction plus a social media overreaction. And I find that it is these kind of overreaction that are driven by misplaced narratives, and I believe that there is an urgent need to identify these narratives, research on how these narratives were formed, and validate or invalidate the narrative, and then suggest intervention. Something which has perhaps not happened to the extent that it should have happened for the ART Act. And finally, my last slide. I have always been asked, and a lot of times by my wife, why do you spend so much time with Foxy? Why do you devote so much time? All of you are here today to attend this conference. In a way, you are contributing and you are making your voice in ISAR felt. And I think as president of Foxy, I should say this. I've always felt we don't appreciate ourselves enough. If you think about where we stand on maternal mortality today, India today has its lowest ever recorded MMR in our living history. And this, in a large part, not fully, but in a large part, is because of us, obstetricians and gynecologists who work day in and day out to deliver women safely. So in all modesty, but with equal pride, let us learn to embrace ourselves, our vibrant and our very amazing associations, Foxy, ISAR, IAG and all, and let us be proud of them. Yes. You know, for me, Foxy is a federation which represents women's health. We are very fervent advocates for women's health, and above all, we save umpteen lives and bring happiness to so many women, men, and create family units which are the driving force of today's society. For me, Foxy means resilience, advocacy, the premier source of professional education, community awareness, fellowship, friendships forged in the crucible of organizing, attending meetings. For me, Foxy and associations like ISAR represent what is best in us in our very unique privilege as healthcare providers for women. And for me, finally, Foxy and ISAR represent a road to the ideals that we strive for. Ideals which would result in a world where no woman needs to die from an unsafe abortion, a world where no woman has an unmet reproductive need, a world where every woman, man, and person has access to infertility treatment, IVF and ART, with safety, efficacy, dignity, transparency, and above all, a world where no woman needs to die in childbirth, a function she did not choose to have, but was thrust upon her by biology and the fact that she was born a woman. After all, history is her story too. Thank you very much.
Hello. Thank you, Dr. Jaydeep. You have such a nice, fantastic talk about that, starting from the ART rule to end, and so elaborately you have told all these things. Still, there is some points to follow because ART people works under such stressful condition
Yes.
that who works that person can know. So thank you so much. And two lines about Sudesh, I should say, he is being associated with us since 2005 and 6, and she has such wonderful personality. He works such patiently that nobody can imagine. So I said people dedicated this oration to such a person. Great job. Thank you so much.
It's an honor to felicitate the orator, and we uh, uh, here President Dr. Nandita Palsetkar, Madam Jayasri Patnaik, please.
The 28th Annual National Conference of Indian Society of Assisted Reproduction, the ISAR late Dr. Sudesh Kamat Oration delivered by Dr. Jaydeep Tank on ART Act current status, 2nd February, Bhubneshwar, signed by Dr. Nandita Palshetkar, the President, Sujata Kar, the Secretary, navigating the new normal in ART.
Thank you.